And I think we kind of get ourselves in a bad feedback loop if we get out of the habit of coming to God, or we never really were taught how that kind of process works, and we just kind of figured out on our own. We get farther and farther away from actually being able to draw on our resources, our godly resources, and our amnesia just gets reinforced the more that we don't kind of maintain that relationship.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Epic Everyday, our weekday podcast for busy, stressed out Christians who don't want to just survive and instead want to really thrive, to have freedom and peace and abundance, all that awesome stuff. I'm Liz Frericks, and this is my husband, Evan.
Good morning.
I'm so glad you guys are here with us today on this wonderful Wednesday.
Yeah.
So since it's Wednesday, we are talking about being centered. Being centered is living out of the essence of who God designed you to be.
Yeah, I'm glad you defined so. I don't know. We've been talking about the CSCs for 6 months now, and I'm still wrapping my brain around some of them.
Yeah.
But it takes active work. These are important principles.
Right. And I think it probably took me 2 years of doing Tai Chi before it was like, look, see. I mean, there were little things along the way where it was like, oh man, okay, I see a difference here. Otherwise, I wouldn't have kept doing it. But
yeah. So centered, like when we're talking about physically, right, is being connected to the earth through our center of gravity.
Grounded.
Which one's that?
Centered is living out of the essence of who God designed you to be. So it's being who God made you to be, and then having your actions come out of that place.
Out of your identity.
Right.
Your real identity.
When you're making your decisions, like, should I do this or should I do A or should I do B? Instead of weighing the decision based on, like, I don't know, whatever other factors, you start with, who did God make me to be? Oh, he didn't make me to be somebody that
bank
does
robber.
A. Yeah, whatever. Instead, I'm going to do B, you know?
Sure. Yeah, just make decisions easier.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we've talked before about how the Sacred Six process has really changed our lives. I mean, day to day, how we schedule things.
Because then that process makes you map out your values.
Right.
And then all the stuff grows out of that, you know.
Right.
But we sometimes think something's a value, and it's really not.
Right.
I mean, there are some universal Christian values, but then there are a lot of nuances that are personal to us that help us make decisions.
Well, and some people love the security of having a 9-to-5 job, and, they don't care if they're doing something they hate as long as they're getting paid for it.
Yeah.
But
they have a higher value in, security and consistency than like freedom and spontaneity. And they're both fine.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So just have to figure out what kind of person God made you to be. Mm-hmm. So, suffering. That's what we're talking about this week. Suffering and being centered.
And how suffering steals our identity.
Yeah.
When we get too into it, we can forget that God has told us who we are. Right.
Well, I was thinking about how it's like we get brainwashed. When we're kind of like I was talking about yesterday with that part in the Gospels where Peter, Jesus comes walking up to the disciples on the water.
Yeah.
And it's great because the text says he's like going to walk past them. Just so, like, hey guys,
Yeah. I'll see you over there.
Right. But so.
That happens a couple of times where it's like Jesus makes like his body language suggests that he's just going to keep walking.
You're like, wait, what? But. So, and the disciples, of course, are terrified. They think he's a ghost. And Peter's like, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come walk on the water with you. And Jesus is like, all right, come onto the boat. And so Peter walks on the water for a little bit, but then he starts looking at the waves and the wind, and he gets scared, and he stops focusing on Jesus, and he starts sinking. I think sometimes that's us. We focus on the wind and the waves or whatever the suffering is, just like we talked about a couple weeks ago when we were in Florida, and it was like our car is dying, and it just felt all consuming, Yeah.
So kind of did wholly consume that whole day.
Right. Yeah. But I think we're brainwashed into thinking that God doesn't care, or into thinking that we're not beloved children, that we're the kind of kids that, the redheaded stepchild, the one that everybody just ignores, or that that God doesn't have a good plan for us, that we're like we're the, I don't know, if you have, if you're thinking about in the context of a story and you have your main characters and then you have your supporting characters and then you have these characters that maybe show up for like one scene and don't really do much and you're like, I'm that kind of character. So I think we start believing these lies about ourselves based on suffering, and the lies change totally how we act and how our lives become.
I have kind of an example or an illustration that I don't
So
know.
do
We'll see
I.
if it
So
works.
what's your
okay.
illustration?
Well, I was thinking, a way to, well, this would just be a mental exercise, but the illustration is there's, a bunch of families at this party, there's kids and adults there, and a kid gets hurt, and they spent the whole time maybe playing with their friends and hanging out with, but they're going to want to go to their mom or their dad at that point. Mm-hmm. They know that that's where they go when they're suffering, and that's where they get their needs met. It would be strange, and this unfortunately does happen, that they would want to go to some other person. Right. But that means there's something wrong with that relationship and that they have forgotten who the parents are. There could be, maybe there's abuse or trauma or something, but that means there's something wrong if they're not like, Mom, Dad, I stubbed my toe or, I hit my head or whatever. So when we're in alignment, understanding that we're God's children, we're constantly running back to God. But if we're running somewhere else when we're suffering, that means there's something wrong.
Yeah. I totally agree with that.
So we're that kid at that party, we need to keep getting our support from our true parent.
Right. And I think you see that with, addictions or vices where you're like, oh, okay, I'm really stressed and this is super awful in my life, so I'm going to go play a computer game or I'm going to go watch my show.
Yeah. And it's just, I think it puts it in stark contrast thinking of a little kid doing that. Like, oh, I stubbed my toe. Now I'm going to go eat this entire cake. Or I'm going to drink some of the punch. It's like, how's that going to help? But that's our logic is when we get mixed up. Yeah. We go to other things.
Totally.
So what was your...
So my example was, which I like where your example went, but my example was, we forget who we are. You can tell I just watched Muppets to Manhattan because Kermit gets amnesia in it. But we forget who we are. So we're just like a guy who's a millionaire that forgets who he is and lives like a homeless person. Because he's still got all that money. He could be drawing that money. Yeah. But if it's in his bank account and he's forgotten about it,
what good is it?
Or if he's been brainwashed into thinking the bank's not going to honor my check, and I think that's what suffering does. It brainwashes us into thinking that we don't have resources and that God isn't going to take care of us. We're not that child that gets the resources, Yeah.
Well, and I think we kind of get ourselves in a bad feedback loop if we get out of the habit of coming to God, or we never really were taught how that kind of process works, and we just kind of figured out on our own. We get farther and farther away from actually being able to draw on our resources, our godly resources, and our amnesia just gets reinforced the more that we don't kind of maintain that relationship.
Yeah, we definitely stay in that scarcity mode every time it's like, something happened and I still don't have money to take care of it, even though there is money.
I think one other thing that really gets us mixed up is similar to that, not going to God, but fixating on the problem and just being all consumed by figuring it out. And like sort of what we were talking about yesterday, like focusing on the suffering so much that we're forgetting about God's love and his care and his ability to redeem it. We're just like, how do I make this, just like, we're not even talking about redeeming it when we're trying to solve the problem. We're just trying to make it a little less painful and to like sort of work out, sort of okay, and like maybe we'll survive, and that's such a bad place to be.
Yeah, like with our car, when we're like, okay, how do we make this car work? Or how do we get to where we need to go anyway?
I think it's tricky because when we do come to God, that still involves suffering. I mean, there's still pain there, but it's all redeemed and it's all in the right perspective at that point. The redemption process and the sanctification process involves changing us because we need to be changed because we're sinful people, and that's always going to feel painful. So it's not like one is easy and pain-free and one is just us being silly and spinning in our brain.
They're both hard.
Yeah.
But there's a joy and peace that comes from doing the work of surrender, being centered and being like, okay, Lord, this is who you say that I am. So I'm going to believe that and act like that.
I think one way to kind of tell what we're doing is a little bit of self-examination as we go is, when something is happening, are we saying, man, why am I so unlucky? Why does this always happen to me? Or are we saying, what are you doing, God? I don't understand this. But now, help me. I'm talking to you now. Because I can't just talk to myself. So there's the two different, one's totally disconnected from God and just whoa, boy, this is going to be hard to figure out.
Yeah.
So where do we tend to go, and how can we practice getting back in touch with God?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I agree. I think for me, part of it is just, anchoring back to the past. What has God already done for me? Oh, right. He's always taking care of me. Even just looking at some of the difficult things that we're in the middle of right now with my illness, it's hard. It's hard being tired all the time and dealing with chronic fatigue and pain and all that kind of stuff. But then I also can look at it and say, well, my PTSD is better than it's ever been before in my entire life. God has been using a lot of the therapies that we would not have prioritized if it hadn't been okay, this is wheelchair or no wheelchair,
Yeah. I think that's God's perspective again. It's those are the things I care about, and I'm going to work on those things. And we want to be okay,
right.
Then I guess we'll work on them too. We'll go along with that, even though I don't really get it.
All right. We love you guys, and we're praying for you. Hopefully that gave you some ideas of where to look to figure out whether you're centered or not and how to get recentered. Because my Tai Chi instructor talks about how we are never really in balance. Life is a system, life is a series of being imbalanced and managing our imbalance better and better.
Yeah.
So, because we're always moving. So we're always having to manage our balance.
And that's good.
Right.
Yeah. It's like a kid who's growing. Our one daughter, when she has growth spurts, she crashes into things all the time because her legs are longer now than they were or whatever, and it's hard. And then you get used to being a little taller than that the next year. So
right,
we want to be moving and growing.
She's always like, am I in the middle of a growth spurt? I think I might be. Thanks to everybody that's been sharing the show and listening to the show. We really appreciate it. If you have found this podcast helpful, please continue to share it. As always, pick whether today is going to be awesome or not, because your choice, just like we were talking before, where you focus will determine how you live your life. So if you pick that today is going to be awesome, it will affect how your day goes. Come back tomorrow and we're going to keep talking about suffering and being connected to God and others in the middle of that.
We'll talk to you then.
Have an awesome Wednesday.